In the heart of London's swinging 60s, two men ruled the city's underworld with an iron fist. Their names became synonymous with violence, fear, and glamour. They moved effortlessly between high society and the darkest corners of organized crime. These men were Reggie and Ronnie Kray, twin brothers who would rise from the rough streets of London's East End to become the most feared criminals in the city's history. But what if I told you that behind the glitz, the fame, and the suits, there was a far darker truth? This is the story of the Kray twins, men who crave power, loyalty, and above all, control. But beneath the facade of wealth and success lay a world of violence, betrayal, and madness. How did two brothers from a modest background build one of the most notorious criminal empires in British history? Reggie and Ronnie Kray were born on October 24, 1933, in Hoxton, East London. They grew up during World War II, and the constant bombing of London shaped their childhood. Raised in a close-knit family, they were inseparable from a young age. Their mother Violet doted on them, and their father Charlie was frequently absent, dodging military service. The twins quickly developed a reputation for being troublemakers. What if I told you that even as boys, the Kray twins were notorious in their neighborhood? They were fighters from the start. As teenagers, they took up boxing, quickly excelling in the sport. Both Reggie and Ronnie were known for their tough demeanors and their ability to take and throw a punch. But it wasn't long before their focus shifted from the ring to the streets. The Krays grew up in a tough environment, and they soon became involved in street fights and petty crime. But their ambitions were much bigger. They craved more than just survival. They wanted power, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get it. Imagine being so feared, even as teenagers, that local police dreaded crossing your path. That's the power the Krays already commanded in their youth. In the 1950s, the Kray twins started building their criminal empire. After a brief stint in the National Service, which ended with the brothers being dishonorably discharged for their violent behavior, they returned to the East End with a new mission: to dominate London's underworld. The twins opened a nightclub called the R Club, which became a hotspot for celebrities, politicians, and high society figures. But behind the glitz and glamour, the Krays ran their club like a fortress, using it as a base for their growing criminal operations. Their control over protection rackets, extortion, and gambling operations expanded rapidly. They weren't just club owners. They were becoming the kings of London's underworld. What if I told you that the twins didn't just rule through fear, but through charm? Reggie, the smoother of the two, handled the business side of their operations. He was charming, calculated, and knew how to play the game. Ronnie, on the other hand, was more volatile. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, his violent tendencies made him unpredictable and deadly. How do two brothers, one smooth, one unhinged, conquer the darkest corners of London's crime scene while dining with celebrities and politicians? The Krays' duality was their strength. Reggie could negotiate, Ronnie could intimidate, and together they were unstoppable. But the world hadn't yet seen the full extent of their violence. By the mid-1960s, the Krays had established themselves as the most powerful gangsters in London. Their control over the East End was absolute. If you wanted to do business in their territory, you paid the Krays. And if you didn't, well, the consequences were brutal. They were involved in everything: armed robbery, protection rackets, arson, and even murder. But the Krays were smart. They operated in the open, often using their legitimate businesses as fronts for their illegal activities. Their influence extended to police officers, politicians, and even members of the judiciary. Behind the facade of wealth, however, the Krays were descending into chaos. Ronnie, in particular, had a taste for blood. His growing paranoia and erratic behavior often resulted in vicious outbursts. In 1966, Ronnie shot and killed George Cornell, a member of a rival gang, in the Blind Beggar pub. It was a bold move, done in broad daylight. Cornell had allegedly called Ronnie a fat poof, and that was all it took to seal his fate. What if I told you that this murder wasn't just about an insult, it was a declaration of power? By killing Cornell in cold blood, Ronnie was sending a message to the underworld: cross the Krays, and you'll pay with your life. But that brazen murder marked the beginning of the end. The Krays' reign was starting to unravel, and soon they would make one fatal mistake. If Ronnie's murder of George Cornell was a bold statement of power, Reggie's murder of Jack the Hat McVitie was a tragic descent into madness and desperation. McVitie was a low-level associate of the Krays who had fallen out of favor. He owed them money, and in the world of the Krays, that was enough to warrant a death sentence. In October 1967, the Krays lured McVitie to a party under the pretense of a meeting. But instead of a discussion, McVitie was met with a brutal execution. Reggie stabbed him repeatedly while Ronnie watched almost gleefully. It was an act of sheer brutality. What if I told you that this was the crime that would bring the Krays to justice? Their empire had been built on violence, but this act, done in front of witnesses, was too reckless, too personal. People began to talk, and soon the police had enough evidence to bring the twins down. With McVitie's murder, the Krays crossed a line they couldn't come back from. In 1968, Scotland Yard launched an intense investigation into the Kray twins and their criminal empire. Detective Superintendent Leonard Nipper Red was tasked with bringing the brothers to justice, and he was relentless in his pursuit. Red knew that taking down the Krays would be no easy task. They were protected by a wall of silence, loyalty, and fear. But as Red closed in, more and more people from the twins' inner circle began to cooperate with the authorities. The Krays empire, once built on fear and respect, was crumbling. What if I told you that the Krays were betrayed by their closest associates? The fear that had once protected them became their downfall. People were finally ready to talk, and in 1968, Reggie and Ronnie were arrested for the murders of George Cornell and Jack McVitie. Their trial was a media sensation. For the first time, the public saw the twins not as glamorous gangsters, but as cold-blooded killers. In March 1969, the Kray twins were sentenced to life imprisonment, with a recommendation that they serve a minimum of 30 years. The reign of terror was over. Even behind bars, the Kray twins remained notorious. Ronnie was sent to Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital, while Reggie was imprisoned at various facilities. Their names still carried weight, and they maintained a certain level of influence from within prison walls. What if I told you that their legend only grew after their imprisonment? The twins became subjects of books, documentaries, and films. Despite their violent history, some saw them as folk heroes, symbols of a bygone era where loyalty and family meant everything. But the truth is far darker. The Krays empire was built on violence, fear, and madness. Their story is not one of glamour. It's one of unchecked ambition and the human cost of power. The Kray twins left a lasting mark on London's history, but it's a legacy built on fear and destruction. The story of Reggie and Ronnie Kray is one of power, violence, and tragedy. Their rise to the top of London's underworld was meteoric, but it came at a heavy price. The Krays were willing to sacrifice anything: friendships, loyalty, and even their own sanity to maintain control. And in the end, it was their own actions that led to their downfall. What if I told you that their greatest downfall was their inability to see the consequences of their own actions? They thought they were untouchable, but in the end, no one is above the law. Turn on the notification bell so that you are the first to enjoy the most compelling crime documentaries. If you enjoyed this video, then click here for another video delving into the inner world of the world's most notorious criminal organizations.